Reckless speculation.
Okay. So yesterday, Rami Maklov on Score North Live asked me how the Vikings could acquire Tom Brady. And I know what your reaction is. It's, yeah, sure. How can I go to space, right? Like, just not going to happen. Okay. That was my reaction as well. But I said, all right, here's the way you could do it. If maybe you signed him to a contract extension that lowered his cap hit, and then you traded him to San Francisco and they cut Jimmy Garoppolo or traded Garoppolo to New England, and you could get it done. You could get Tom Brady if he wanted to come here. If Brady told you, yep, I'm coming to Minnesota, you guys make it work. But the biggest roadblock in my mind was that it would be a big dead cap hit for the Vikings to trade him away. So then someone on Twitter informed me that there was a way to figure out exactly how much cap space is moved to the other team or dead cap space to you if you trade every player. Most of the time, it's the same as if you cut him. So if you cut Stephon Diggs, you incur a $9 million dead cap, and the same if you trade him, which is why, again, it makes no sense to trade Stephon Diggs. So most of them, when you do this little click and check on overthecap.com, usually the same. Yeah. That's how you figure it out. Clicked on Kirk Cousins. This Twitter listener, Justin Rochester, showed me. And if you trade Kirk Cousins, it's only a $1.5 million dead cap. $31 million if you cut him, but only $1.5 if you trade him. Now, he does have a no trade clause. But that becomes somewhat interesting for getting outrageously reckless and talking about whether there's any argument to try and see if Kirk Cousins would be interested in being traded somewhere.
Well, let's go beyond that. It's going to happen. Brady to the Vikings is happening after what you just told me.
Yeah,
clearly.
I'm in.
I mean, the no trade clause kind of takes some of the shine off it, but that's interesting, though, that, trade feels like, and you wonder, if Brady obviously is sort of just, we're just kind of talking, but like, is that a move you consider? Because a guy like that, if you can find someone who feels like he's a better fit for them, and you get their guy in exchange, like maybe it works out for everybody. That is fascinating. I didn't know that.
And this goes along with Jeremy Fowler, who's going to be on the station later today, saying there's a mystery team that is interested in Tom Brady.
Look what you're doing, man.
We got a mystery team.
So who are the team? The biggest teams now? What? Vegas, we've heard.
Yep. Not Houston. The other team that used to be Houston, Tennessee.
Okay.
San Francisco was thrown out there.
I've heard that.
That one's a hard one to believe, but Jimmy Garoppolo, if they trade him, they only take on a $4 million dead cap themselves.
It's interesting that we're talking about Jimmy Garoppolo like we did going into the 2019 season when everyone was like, hey, here's how easy it would be to get rid of him after the year. And now the conversation is still happening. Well, that is interesting to me because if it were realistic, you would have to explore it, right? Like, I mean, there's no doubt about it.
This is the same team that admitted to calling Drew Brees just in case.
Yes.
When Drew Brees was a free agent, before they ultimately signed Kirk Cousins, they made the phone call and said, hey, Drew, just in case New Orleans treats you dirty, why don't you come on up here? And of course, he ended up going back to New Orleans. But this is the team that got Brett Favre. So everything should always be on the table after Brett Favre ended up playing for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yes. The last thing I want is for my NFL team to be loyal in today's market. It just doesn't exist. You just can't think of teams that way. Like this is, especially if you're a contender, you're trying to be a contender. Anyone to me is replaceable potentially. Obviously, the cap matters a lot. You can't just do anything you want. But if there is a favorable situation and you can get a great player who might not have more than a year or two playing great, I don't care. I want to win a Super Bowl. That's what matters to me. Like, I don't care about 5-6 years from now. Like, that'll come. Let's win a Super Bowl if we've got the pieces to do it. And you bring in a Tom Brady, there's just no doubt you would do anything you could. And he'd come in and be the starter. Even if it were 1 year, you take that.
Yeah, and especially if you're thinking that Kirk Cousins is going to ask for too much when it comes to contract negotiations for an extension, then you'd be talking about a quarterback on a 1-year deal anyway.
Yeah.
Now, I have an extra level of reckless.
This isn't that?
Jonathan, do you just want to preemptively hit the reckless speculation button for me?
Reckless speculation.
Let's say that San Francisco wanted Kirk Cousins. That's the one team that he would waive his no trade for, to go play with Kyle Shanahan, a team that just went to the Super Bowl. Normally, he wouldn't do it for anybody else. You're not trading me to Miami, but I will go play with my buddy Kyle, and it's nice out there in San Fran. And Kirk Cousins is one of the only human beings who can afford to live in San Francisco.
That's true.
So he would
Get a 1-bedroom.
love to be
what he's making.
right.
Be nice.
He could be on the Tiny Houses show.
Yeah.
With his $84 million contract.
He might need a roommate still.
So he can. So let's say that he tells you that's the only team I'll go to.
Okay.
So you call Kyle Shanahan. He says, let's do it. And I'm going to trade Jimmy Garoppolo to New England because Tom Brady's signing with someone else. And Brady signs with the Titans because Teddy Bridgewater is coming back. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. That is that is a Friday level of recklessness.
That's your hope, isn't
that
it?
even is too far for me. Well, I don't know. It doesn't matter to me either way. But in terms of what Vikings fans would love and what Mike Zimmer would love, Tom Brady or Teddy Bridgewater would get his nod over Kirk Cousins, I think.
Oh, they would both get a parade downtown. 100%.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Teddy's would be kind of teary-eyed. I mean, that'd be a whole nother emotion because of everything.
Yep.
But Brady, Brady would get, there'd be people handing him
Key to the
chicken
city.
Wild Rice soup,
Key
on
to
his
both
way.
cities.
Their favorite IPA they just brewed in their basement. Like he'd get the full.
He would get a
treatment.
parking spot in St. Paul.
But yes, but it is fascinating to me, right, that we now look at that position, unless you have a generational kind of quarterback, and there just aren't that many guys, right, who you go, you get to stay as long as you want. You're Patrick Mahomes. You're probably going to do this to your 40 or older, right? Drew Brees, guys like that. Everyone else, it feels like you're kind of just playing in the moment. I don't know what's going to happen next year. And the Vikings have done, that's been their reality from Bradford, Case Keenum. And Cousins, in many ways, if you could have treated him that way, you might have made a move. If he doesn't have $84 million guaranteed, who knows what might have happened. So I think it's just fascinating that Brady is a free agent at a time when everyone's like, yeah, you just got to win now. Like nobody cares about 3-4 years from now the way they once did. No one cares about long-term situations because we're all going, here's the window. We're trying to win now. And that's the only thing you can think of.
This is the only year that I could also think of where this would ever be a possibility because of the sheer number of quarterbacks who are available.
Yeah, there's a lot.
When Kirk Cousins comes available, think about what his resume was in Washington. He was largely a backup who got in and was a 500 quarterback as a starter who had some good numbers on really talented offenses. And he was highly sought after.
Yep.
A bunch of teams are calling on Kirk Cousins. The Jets want him. Denver reportedly wanted him. San Francisco, before they got Garoppolo, was desperate to get Kirk Cousins out there with Kyle Shanahan. So a bunch of teams were really interested in Kirk Cousins, whose resume was just, okay.
It was okay.
And he looked like a starting quarterback in the NFL who, if you build a great team, you might be able to win with him. But, even it's sort of played out that you can only get so far with him.
They didn't give him long-term money.
And he gets the biggest contract ever at the time for being just that good. And here we are a couple years later. Teddy Bridgewater goes 5-0 when he gets in for the New Orleans Saints. And if he's good to go with his knee, he's a franchise quarterback.
Yep.
Tom Brady is arguably the best quarterback to ever hold a football, a deflated slightly football. But
okay. All right. That's not necessary.
I'm from Buffalo. I had to. But
I understand.
So he's all of a sudden on the market. Phillip Rivers might still be able to play, and he's on the market. And then there are other guys, too, who are interesting, like Mariota, like Jameis Winston.
Which those guys got to be upset, right? If you're Jameis Winston,
sure,
you're
they would have been getting a job.
I picked a terrible time to be
throw
available.
30 picks also.
So he's balling, though. Remember that.
A little bit. Yeah, I know. A little bit on him with the 30 picks. In fact, almost all on him. But to your point, if he was a free agent 3 years ago, at the same time Kirk Cousins was, someone would have paid him a ton of money and said, we can fix Jameis Winston because everyone is so freaking desperate. This league once paid Elvis Grbac a bleep ton of money to go to the Baltimore Ravens because they were desperate. And now you have all-time great quarterbacks and franchise quarterbacks who are on the market which could potentially, it may not, it probably won't. That's why it's reckless, but it could potentially change how the Vikings view things. Because if in 2020, they are all about winning, they're all about being all in still, they still believe as an ownership, a front office, a coaching staff, certainly as a coaching staff, we know they would. Every coaching staff thinks they'll win, but an ownership and a front office that if they believe 2020 can still be our year, we'll fix this defense, we'll create some cap space, and we'll upgrade the quarterback position, and we can get ourselves over the top that way. I mean, why wouldn't you talk about it in a market like this?
You would.
The same way that you talk about other positions and trying to upgrade.
Oh, I think you have to. I mean, there's going to be a guy who threw for 5,000 yards who might not get a starting job in the NFL this offseason. Like that's the market, you know, which you wouldn't see that a couple of years ago. Here's what it tells me, and here's why if you're the Vikings, you have to really have any and all conversations about that position. Tom Brady is going to get whatever job he wants.
Yep.
Because there are a bunch of teams in this league that feel like they're one elite quarterback away from winning it all. That's a big difference from the good quarterbacks, which Kirk Cousins can be that, right? But there's such a divide between the guys who you're like, okay, that dude can be great, and my guy who's good, but he's not going to carry us to the championship. He's not going to carry us to the promised land. And that's your Kirk Cousins, your Garoppolos, guys like that who are pretty good, but you don't think they have maybe that next gear in them. And it just says so much about not just the value of that position, but how much teams are willing to do if they can upgrade.
Yep.
Like that's the game. That is the entire game, which Minnesota thought it was doing after Case Keenum, right? That was sort of the mindset. But teams are on, and I think this is sort of a more recent thing because there's less patience in front offices. Like if you're the Vikings right now and you're Spielman and Zimmer, you don't have the ability to talk about what happens next offseason. You don't have you've got to figure out something now. If you have a lack of confidence in that position, you've got to really think long and hard about what happens there. But Brady's, forget the age. We know he can still play at a high level. But the fact that there are teams, Tennessee just had one of the more miraculous postseasons we've seen, one of the more miraculous second halves of a season that we've seen. And they're like, oh, Ryan Tannehill, listen, if we can get somebody better than him, step aside, we're going to bring him in. So that to me is the difference. A bunch of teams have Kirk Cousins, and they know if you can get a guy who's just a step above that, and Brady's is more steps above that, but if you can get like a guy who has the potential to be great, even if it's for a couple seasons, you do everything you can to get that guy.
And keep in mind, we don't know currently the status of Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman in terms of their contracts. And if you are the front office, you could very well let them go into the last year of it and just see how they do. And even though ownership put out the statement at the end of last season about we're very confident in them and so forth, we want to go forward with them. If your ownership is in a position where they're putting out a statement about your status, that already tells you what your status is.
Yes.
Right.
It ain't good.
And if it's a 2-year extension, it's still a 0 year because most of the time it's a 0-year extension for everybody. Matt Rule in Carolina signed a 5-year contract. They could fire him after a year. They've got the money if they really wanted to fire him after a year, fire him after 2. We've seen lots of teams paying all sorts of money to people who aren't working those jobs. And so even if it comes out eventually that Zimmer and Spielman are extended for 2 or even 3 years, the hot seat still exists. And they know that at this point, because when you've been together for a while and you've reached your peak and it looks like you're coming down from that peak, that's when people start to get anxious about their jobs, and reasonably so, because in the NFL, they just fire you.
There's no conversation.
Unless you work for the Steelers, they don't stick with you through any of that. So I guess let's just be absurdly reckless here. It's supposed to be really nice this weekend. It's supposed to hit the
best weather
60s
of the year by far. Best weather almost in a long time.
Makes me feel extra reckless about talking about this. So let's talk about
go for a hike or something. Brothers don't go for hikes.
I was going to say,
I do.
Do you?
Yeah, I'm out there, man. People give me funny looks, but I'm out there. I see you.
I didn't know.
That's me in the sunglasses.
I didn't know that was like a racial thing.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I just don't see a lot of brothers in the path. It's just me. I invite everybody. Everyone should go hiking. It's a really great pastime.
Okay, because I knew that there are certain things that you could say, well, they
ice fishing.
Wouldn't do that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know hiking was one of them.
Actually, no, I do know a dude, a guy who ice fishes. No, it's Minnesota,
ice fishes, yeah.
Minnesota kind of absorb. Minnesota, we all kind of pick up stuff that maybe. I know brothers that ski and do stuff that you would maybe think of.
Okay, and like go to hockey games.
Man, hockey's great. Live hockey is one of the better sports, like spectator sports.
Yeah,
like to be there for. I mean, that's one of the cooler in-game kind of vibes. Always high energy.
We can continue this conversation.
We can
off the air probably, but it would be one of the few places in America where a hockey game you would see a little more diverse amount of people.
Well, and
because you grow up with the culture.
You'd see a certain energy, and imagine it's not going to happen, right? But imagine what would happen to this fan base if someone like a Brady showed up. Imagine what that would do to a fan base that has just been waiting.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've been here 20 years, and throughout that entire time, this fan base has been waiting for that guy.
Yeah.
And I come from Wisconsin, where we were lucky enough to go from Don Majkowski, who actually had a Pro Bowl year.
The Magic Man.
But to go from Favre to Rodgers, which is not fair. It doesn't happen. So there was never a period growing up of like this anticipation that this guy has to come and show up and save the franchise. But here, for the last 20 years, that's exactly what it's been. And I can't imagine how frustrating that must be to go through 2 decades of like, you just want to settle in and be like, okay, forget 10 years, man. We got to do for the next 5 years. And we trust them.
So if you even just imagine it for a second that Brady is pulled off somehow, that Cousins, just imagine it for a second. Man. Cousins gets traded to San Francisco. Garoppolo's back in New England with Bill Belichick, and Brady says, "I want to play with Thielen and Diggs. I've never wanted anything more. And Antonio Brown's coming with me." All right, maybe not.
No, I don't think
but
that's.
Imagine you are in that locker room. And you're, I don't know, somebody who's been through this with a different quarterback all the time. You're Thielen, you're Diggs, you're Kyle Rudolph, you're Harrison Smith. Imagine being Harrison Smith. And when you're on the sideline after having done your job, you're looking out there going, okay, well, Case Keenum, is he really going to do this for us? Like, we're going to have to bail his ass out probably. Yeah. Sam Bradford, and does his knees work? And, here's Kirk, who turtles every time things gets pretty tough.
Yeah.
Tom Brady walks into your locker room. I mean, the amount of energy that would shoot through the organization to get someone like that would just be out of this world. So we agree that we would do that.
100%.
Right? No one is saying no to Tom Brady being the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings.
Even if it's a year.
I think it would have to be a year or two, probably 2. I think he's probably asking $35 million a year for 2 years, which your salary cap is already set up to handle a quarterback that wants a lot of money.